what's your experience with VR, and are you familiar with the older or the VR of the 90s and the early 2000s?
So I'm not familiar with the VR of the 90s. However, I am familiar with the limitations of even the VR headsets now. And I will just add, just what I see are the biggest limitations are physical. Like cell phones, you don't really have to think about battery too much. Like it doesn't feel like it's going to constantly run out of battery. But a VR headset, it feels like it's going to constantly run out of battery. It has a fan on it, but it overheats all the time. And then when it overheats, it slows down. So there are these like physical limitations as well. And so, like speaking of timing, I do feel like there are some hardware breakthroughs that need to be had to make it like more mainstream. And but that being said, a lot of these limitations can be overcome if you just if you are okay with it being less convenient. Like if it's always plugged in and it's plugged into like hardware, then it's quite a nice experience. But yeah, that's my experience with VR, my personal experience.
I think the issue that people have sometimes, because I was just about to ask you, is it not heavy? It looks heavy.
Yeah, yes, it is. It is quite heavy. So it's you know you're wearing it. You know you're wearing it, but it is getting like thinner and smaller every generation.
Right. And so what I'm getting at here is this: you just talked about battery life, though. The thing that people don't understand is the longer your charge lasts, the more massive your battery has to be, and batteries are not light. It's the same issue we've dealt with laptops and cell phones for years now. There's always this battle between how much what is it, the measurement? How many
mega amp hours
do we... I mean, they could put, like, you could have a phone that lasts like 3 days. I mean, using it straight for 3 days, and it would weigh 3 kilograms. So there's always, you always have to decide what is more important. So like you said, you could have it plugged in all the time, and you could make it lighter, again, but it's the same thing. And I think of cars when I think of making things lighter. Like you can make a car lighter, it's going to go faster, but you basically are tearing your seats out and all the innards of it. You take your air conditioner out, and the car will run faster, but then you're losing all of these comfy things, right? And so, for me, I think the biggest turnoff aside from the nausea is, like right now I'm wearing a headset. I can't stand it. I don't like things touching me. I mean, that's probably more rare case than it is for the average person, but I can't stand things on me. So I would be much more comfortable with a headset that I didn't really feel or know was there. I would love some sort of apparatus that sort of, I don't know, like sort of sits in front of my face, but doesn't actually really touch me, that type of thing. But again, that's too futuristic, right? So it sounds like we have a lot more to figure out here. And frankly, I asked myself the question, why do we want virtual reality? Especially when reality itself, I mean, there's a lot of beauty in the world. There's a lot of ugliness as well. But I would almost like to philosophically ask, why do we want virtual reality? What is your intentions of using it yourself personally?
I find it exciting to have a lot of physical limitations lifted. For example, there's remote work right now, and if you can get remote work to the place where it feels like you're not remote, then I almost feel like the dream is then essentially what you've done is you've invented teleportation. That's the way I think about one of the biggest really interesting goals about VR is if VR can feel real, then you've essentially created a reality where a lot of the limitations of the real world can be lifted. That's the way I think about it. Now, that being said, I've also put a lot of thought into the idea that, like, even though you are aiming to do that, it doesn't have to be like a replacement for reality. It's just an alternate way. It's like we do video calls now, and we also meet in person. So just to speak to the other side of, like, people might have misgivings about that idea. I just think the promise of VR lifting certain physical limitations is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I immediately think, and I've already sort of negated part of this in my own head, why not just work in an office? But okay, if you work internationally, that's a big ask, obviously, if everyone's if your team's all over the world. So I do understand the need for video conferencing. But at the same time, I mean, you could just work with people closer to you. That's another option. So I do get the goal here. I just don't know that I would ever feel like I'm in an office if I had this clunky thing on my head. I think I'm fine with just sitting in front of a computer screen knowingly that I'm not in an office with these people and then I am remote from them because I don't really feel like you can replace. Why replace something that for no reason? You know, it's almost like we're trying to keep this like historical fact alive. Like, well, we used to work in offices and we used to work in cubicles, and now we have the freedom of living at home and working with people across the world. But let's narrow that back down and like make ourselves feel more confined by simulating an office in a tube in front of our head. So I don't know. I don't see it for me, but I do understand the use cases for others.
Well, like I do want to reiterate what I said, which is I was saying I put a lot of thought into the idea that it is not about replacement. It is about the way I would think about it is alternate. Because yes, we do meet in person, and we do text each other, and we do have video calls. And so I don't really view it as replacement for anything, but I can see like it opening up many different avenues. For example, let's say someone's confined to a wheelchair, but they're quite capable of doing the job. Well, if they attended in a virtual capacity, I can imagine that being quite like it can be enough for certain applications, maybe.
Wouldn't they have to be like a holographic version of themselves at the office? I mean, they're not. I mean, anybody in a wheelchair is just as able as we are to work remotely.
Yes.
So I'm not seeing the use case for virtual reality there.
Well, okay. So the idea being, there is something lacking in a video. Like if someone is just remote, there's something that's missing. People have noticed, as opposed to if they're working in the office. There's just a wall, like some kind of wall, and so the dream is that virtual reality might break some of these walls more than a video call.
I'm one of those people. I feel the same. I at some point I can't stand remote work. I'd prefer to be in an office, but that means I physically be in an office. I don't feel that anything that we create will ever, well, that's not true. If something was hooked up to my brain and made me really feel like I was there, then yes, I would concede to that. But anything short of that wouldn't be enough for me. But anyway, I get what you mean. So it makes complete sense. All right, so the next thing, which is fascinating, that even back as early as the 1996, GM created the EV1, which was arguably the earliest electric car. I don't remember exactly when like the Toyota Prius came out, which was not fully electric, hybrid, right? But 1996 was a bit early for this. Similar to now, but much, much worse. The reason for failure was limited battery range. It only went approximately 60 to 90 miles. So, I mean, frankly, that's barely a trip to and from work, which I suppose could be sufficient for some people. You know, you just need something to commute to work and back, sure. But that's very limiting. No charging network at all. Even now, I don't know how. I've noticed a lot of electric car terminals for plugging in these days, so I'm assuming it's getting better for people, but there was no network for that then, and there was absolutely no policy support whatsoever. So, I mean, what do you do there? The auto industry didn't want it. GM, so they created the EV1, literally repossessed and destroyed every single EV1 that they created because the industry was just like, no. Consumers weren't concerned with climate impact yet. So I guess now climate is a big issue, so a lot more electric cars are being created for that reason. I'm not exactly sure. But the core issue here is that the tech existed, but it lacked the ecosystem support, so there was no support there to keep this afloat. So it wasn't a tech problem, it was a timing and, unfortunately, a resistance problem. What are your thoughts on electric cars? Have you ever driven or owned or thought about owning one, and did you know that they existed in the 90s?
I really haven't put much thought into electric cars personally. I just find it a very fascinating example of what you've been talking about. I think the lens that you use is timing. The lens that I use is just that the problem that you're attempting to solve is way larger than it seems. That's what I see here. I mean, it's not just cars that you're changing here. You're changing Like who's gonna maintain the cars? How are you gonna fund? How are you gonna charge the cars? And then public opinion, like general public opinion, has been like, oh, electric cars, those are like lower quality cars that just aren't reliable. That's like that's public opinion. That's also included here. There's just been so many very interesting what do you call them, like movements to make this actually happen. For example, legal things like saying, oh, you can drive in the carpool lane if you have an electric car. Like there's just, I find it fascinating because there's so many moving parts in so many different like dimensions of reality that this involves, and this like I looked into this very deeply because I found that whole like the whole moving like systems kind of idea of this so fascinating. So that's my view of it. Directly speaking about the car, I didn't put much thought into it.
Yeah, I have too much of a personal, I don't know what to call it. It's not a bias, just I personally align with one direction, and there's nothing that's going to change that. It has nothing to do, it's not political or anything like that. And so I prefer one thing over another. But I do see, yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things, like you said, the problem is bigger than we are able to really even fathom. But yeah, I mean, honestly, that's everything. We're constantly trying to make things better step by step and try to understand these bigger problems, or at least shrink them down until they're gone, or until the new problem sort of comes up. So that's such is life. Anyway, the last one on my list is cryptocurrency, which this is still ongoing, and this is the newest one on the list. It's not new in the sense that it hasn't been around very long, but in the big scheme of things, yeah, it hasn't been around very long. I don't remember, 2007, I think, or so, was when the first, cryptography has been around forever, and cryptography in the sense of creating some sort of decentralized currency, the idea has been around for a long time, and the first one was created quite a while ago, but it wasn't being traded until, like I was saying, not 2007. I think it was closer to 2010, I believe, but I don't really remember. Like 90-something% of people had their like coins stolen from them anyway, or hacked, etc. So it was an absolute mess for the first few years, until theoretically even 2013, when I think exchanges were being created. It was just a nightmare. People lost their Bitcoin and all these other coins that were created later, and just can't access them anymore. Anyway, that's not really the topic. So I would say it's arguably still too early. We're still not having a clue what's going on here. While in recent times there have been the SEC has made certain movements towards like creating ETFs and stuff for these, it's still really far from where it needs to be. So what is the struggle here? User experience is still ridiculously too technical. Even for me, like I still, like, okay, so you have wallets, you have keys, you have gas fees. Gas fees are not intuitive. Those are fun to explain to people. But basically, like the average person, okay, I mean, I've seen people get confused at a bank. So this is way beyond that. There's a lot you need to know in order to sort of either use or purchase, or however you want to look at it, these coins, etc. And how do you spend them? All this stuff is not really clear. It's very convoluted, and it's very time consuming and very confusing and dangerous. It's extremely easy to lose all of your coin just by mistyping in a letter, for example. You don't have that issue when you go to the bank. You screw up your password, worst case scenario, you get blocked out of your account and have to go to the bank and get that fixed. So that's not the case with cryptocurrency. Regulations, so that's where I started to touch base with the SEC. Regulation is still quite unclear. We haven't had mass adoption yet. And the reason being, people are extremely scared, and for good reason, right? Like I said, you don't know. First of all, regulation's unclear, so you don't know if you're going to be able to use this stuff. Eventually, let's say it gets banned, especially in the United States of all places. Then you'll watch basically all your money be worth nothing, because all the prices of all the coins will go down. And this constantly happens. There's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of rug pulling going on, all these things, and there's a lot of misunderstanding that creates a lot of fear, and so people can't feel comfortable with this. I would say the same thing about fiat currency, but hey, if you understand macroeconomics and economics of your country, you'll see what I mean. It's just as scary, to be honest with you, what your purchasing power is and what it will be in the future. But hey, such is life. Many use cases are still quite speculative, and they're not very practical. So until that becomes something, until it becomes practical, I don't think people are going to want to use it that much. And like I said moments ago, volatility basically makes the currency unusable. It's impossible to know. Like, if you have $10,000 worth of some coin and tomorrow it's worth 2,000, like, how do you decide what you're doing with that? I mean, you've lost 80% of your worth, first of all. So what is that? That's unstable. So it's not useful. Core issue: infrastructure. Mental models for trustless systems aren't widespread yet. So until that's fixed, I would say, honestly, stay away from cryptocurrency. If you want to make money off of it, sure. If you're a trader, great. Otherwise, stay away. There's just really no point to deal with it. Maybe buy some Bitcoin when it's really low and just hold it for about 20 years. But even that could become worthless too. So it's a risk, like anything. So it's a revolution waiting for clarity, simplicity, and yeah, some killer apps. There's a lot of games out there that are being created. So that is pretty cool. But still too far and few. Thoughts on cryptocurrency?
So like electric cars, I find this quite fascinating. I'm kind of a philosopher or tinkerer, and like electric cars, I find the problem that cryptocurrency is attempting to solve quite fascinating. And I think one of the very positive things that cryptocurrency has foisted upon the world is like, do you actually know what money is? Do you actually know what value is? And so from that lens, I found it a fascinating thing. And then I just think about like the role of banks, and I just looked up the FDIC. Like, there were bank runs in the past because people lost trust in the money supply, and so. What I find fascinating is, like, as DeFi, as decentralized finance matures more and more, they discover, oh yeah, we actually kind of need that too, huh? Or else, like, no one's gonna put $1 billion into cryptocurrency because they just, like, there's zero like backup of it. They can just go away tomorrow and there's nothing you can do, right? So what do? Well, you might have to add back in some sort of like what do you call it, like what do you call that? Like just collateral or responsibility, right? And so for all of these reasons, for the kind of philosophical reasons, I found this concept quite fascinating. I did invest a little bit, and I mean, just speaking from an investment standpoint, if it is based upon the value of a more traditional currency, it's quite reliable because in the end, you can use the systems built for that, right? But I just find it fascinating that there's so much that we have to reinvent here, and so it was a very interesting like exploration from that perspective, and I would agree that it's still quite immature.
Yeah, this is a rough topic because there's a lot to this. It's not just the things you just explained are just like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of interest in different things in the world by big corporations and just people. And some people are interested in cryptocurrency. Some people are interested in banks. Some people are interested in fiat itself or whatever it might be. And so there's, like you said, it could disappear and be gone tomorrow, but the same can be said about the US dollar, for example. If it weren't for governments bailing out banks, especially all those failed banks in California, which I don't understand how that like is legal, then we would have big problems even with our fiat currency, with cash and with bonds, etc. A government bond, sure, those are pretty safe, but even then, like, do you trust your government? I'm not claiming I don't. I'm just saying, like, these are all questions you have to ask yourself. In fact, that's why you have a lot of people that they don't invest in any of the things we've talked about. They invest in things like actual real world commodities like gold, silver, other precious metals, different things like this. Even oil, which you don't really physically own the oil, but I mean, anyway, it's all risky and it all like you said can go. So this is a really difficult topic, and because there's like powerful interests in different areas of these different types of monetary systems or however you want to call it, it makes things really uncomfortable, at least for someone like me who knows so much about it. If you're just the average person who doesn't know anything, then sure, just stick to your savings account. It's probably safer for you. But point being here that with cryptocurrency, it's like you said, there's just it's the riskiest and the most uncomfortable and the most unsafe of all the types.
Yeah. Well, I do want to add one more thing that I realized researching this is almost the power of the masses. The power of the masses, because there's one thing that I do want to raise, which is which fiat has going for it, is that even if fiat does fail, then we're all in the same boat. And so, I have a different view on what government is. Government is like the collective power of the masses. I'll say it that way. And so, yeah, if, for example, some part of the economy fails, well, if we let it fail, then it'll like cause damage to all these other things. So, if we can collectively heal that, then it helps all of us, kind of idea. So, that's kind of how I see what could happen if fiat had like a big problem emerged. Then people would have to move to like repair it in a way that doesn't destroy everything. However, I cannot say as much for cryptocurrency. Like if cryptocurrency fails, it might just have to be like almost like an amputated limb, kind of in a way. Which a lot that's already happened a few times, right? What is it, USDT, things like that? Yeah.
All right, let's talk now about how does one gauge market readiness. So the tactics that I would offer here is to search for demand. Okay, so there are various ways to do this. I'm not going to go through all of them just for the sake of time, but this is pretty simple. If you don't see demand, if you don't see, you can look on, you can use like Google Analytics or different types of analytics online, sure, but I mean, and just generally, if you've come up with an idea, it's probably because you've been interacting with certain people somewhere and you've gotten this idea somehow. So do you see a demand for it? If you don't, well, that's a sign. Audience behavior. Well, okay, that's a little bit vague, but audience behavior basically is if you have an audience, so let's say you're a YouTuber or a podcaster or, I don't know, a stand-up comedian, doesn't matter. If the audience is just kind of sat there looking like, they're bored or they're just not liking it, or if you get boos and hisses, or on the internet, it would be, you'd be relying on your feedback loop here and viewership and where's the drop-off there, if there is one, and try to analyze why that is. So look at the behavior of your audience to give you answers. Another thing you can do is if you're following a particular trend is you look at adjacent trends, and you can look for early signs of something popping, and then you can sort of ping off of that. And so that can be very helpful. And another thing is if you will sometimes notice that there's a problem, but I don't know if you've noticed the problem yourself, but you'll notice that other people have noticed it. And then you'll find communities forming like Reddit or whatever online, or just in your community, people forming around these workarounds. So you have workarounds for solving a particular problem. Well, right there, that's a gold mine, because if you can recognize that and you have an idea and a plan for how to just completely fix that so the workaround's no longer necessary, then right there you go. That's your market. And you can tell that the market's ready, because if communities are forming, not just a few people, I mean actual communities, and there's multiple, then that's a large number of people, which means you now know that the market is ready or is eager to absorb any sort of solution here. So that's the type of data I use, and I'm sure there's tons of others. What kind of data would you track to identify a soon-to-be-ready market?
So I'll speak to what I generally have found to be my behavior around this is I like to put myself at the hub, just figuratively, like where the action is, and then see what feels itchy, what seems to keep happening. And I think that's very much just almost like a software developer philosophy of we do this too much. We need to automate that. And I seem to apply that to whatever's happening here. So yes, I do look for, like, are a lot of people asking this question? Well, then we probably need a tool for that or a product for that. So I see, the tactics that you've offered, I quite well agree with it. However, I would say myself is the place that I trust most this data is me, like, being there and, like, in the action, and then that's where I can see these things.
Okay, so cost. We have to sort of constantly be aware of cost, right? When we are doing anything, if you really think about it. So there's a cost to waiting and there's a cost of being early. So let's try to take a look at what the differences between those might be. For me, if I launch not early, but too early, I'm wasting time or I'm burning through time, money, other resources, right? Even energy, trying to educate people. And this is not something that I personally like doing. And I don't think that's a really strategic way. I mean, it's strategic, but it's not the right strategy when trying to create something. If you have to spend a lot of energy getting people to understand what it is you're offering, then you should move on to something else, honestly. However, the question, or rather, if I wait too long and someone else builds it, this happens to me all the time when I'm creating software. I worry, if I wait too long, someone else builds it, or this wave, this trend passes me by, what do I do? And that's a very valid question. Unfortunately, it's really a gamble either way, in my opinion. And so that's why, frankly, I can't offer any solace here, because no matter what you do, you're gambling, right? You're taking a risk. It's taking the risk that's important. That's the decision. Do you take the risk or not? A lot of people don't. And so I'm assuming if you're here listening to this, you're probably the type of person who is either wanting to understand how to either handle risk, or is a risk, someone who's okay with a certain amount of risk. Otherwise, I don't think this is really the topic for you. But for me, I'd rather be early. And the reason is, if you're too late, you're too late. And you will regret. You might regret things. I don't like regret, because that's me kind of looking at the past. I mean, what's the point, right? But if you're early, you have options, right? You have more options. You can pivot. We talked about pivoting already today. And so you have more options here, and I like that. And it gives me a chance to sort of revamp or refactor what I'm doing. So I would ask you, would you rather refine your system sort of in the background, or would you just like to launch something minimal like an MVP and test the market response?
I absolutely want to launch something minimal and get the market response, because I really think that is the only thing I personally can trust. I want to see the actual result and act off that.
What is more appealing to you? Building elegantly while nobody notices, or watching sloppy builders go viral while you're still polishing what you're working on?
So as I was listening to you explain, I thought, like, cost of waiting versus cost of being early. My thought was, be early as fast as possible. That's what I was thinking, because one advantage I see of that is now you know you're early, and you hopefully know why. Now, if you know you're early and you know why, well, now you have the knowledge to know when to attack it again. For example, oh, they did that? Well, now is the perfect time to solve this problem.
You also have the advantage. If you're the first person to do something, there's no competition there. So if you got it right, awesome. If you didn't, like you said, you can get it, you're ahead of the game. You can now move on to the next thing, while someone else just weeks later has the same idea you had weeks ago and is just starting on it, and maybe didn't realize that it doesn't work. So obviously I do believe a degree of planning is important, but that is sort of part of it. Knowing how to plan efficiently. Planning doesn't always have to be this long, drawn out thing. If it's something like you said, if it's, you got an idea, you're like, all right, I know how to do it. Let's just do it. Don't wait. There's no reason to wait. Building something elegant comes later, and maybe never, especially in the way things work now. All right, let's say I have a product idea, and I think that product idea is going to help remote teams. So we talked about remote teams today as well. Those teams will, it'll help them create a culture of trust, and they're going to be using AI generated team rituals. So the proposal here is, I already have decided people need this, and it's the future of remote work. So it's future oriented. It's saying, hey, this is how remote work is now. This is how it could be better. So I would ask you, how would you test if the market is ready for this?
So my gut response here is I would translate market to need, my own need, and then I would use my understanding of what remote teams I feel need, and then I would attempt to solve those. And then if I see that AI can't solve that, that's when I would know, okay, then the market's not ready. That's my answer to this.
Yeah, that's the answer I would expect. I guess it's very experimental. It's saying like, well, I don't know, so let me evaluate my current situation. Okay, maybe let's try it. Work, like, does it work or doesn't it work? And then decide to go to market with it. So, yeah, that's the approach that I would expect you to take. So that's a good answer. There's no right or wrong answer here. For me, if I felt truly like, okay, I know that AI generated team rituals are important for remote teams. How do I create trust in those teams? And then I would just sort of flesh it out and then try to send it out there. But that's a little bit more like just taking a risk. I'm not claiming I believe in this idea. In fact, I'm not sure exactly how I would do it. But okay, so you've come up with an idea. You've maybe even started working on it, and for whatever reason, you've come to the conclusion that you are early. You are too early. What do you do? What do you do now? How do you get out of this situation? Because you might find yourself that you've spent money, you've spent time, or you just, I don't know, whatever it is you've done, you've invested some part of yourself into this, or somebody else's something into this, but obviously you want to keep going, right? You don't want to just give up on everything you're doing. So what do you do? Option number one, pivot. Pivot towards a simpler or an adjacent product. So the product that you were originally trying to create, there might be a solution, but it's not that particular solution. This is where you have to be able to, I've talked about this in another podcast, where you have to always be in a sort of state of reassessment. Every time you take steps or a number of steps, you readjust yourself and reassess where you're at. And then let's say you decided, yeah, it's time to pivot. I don't see it. Don't be stuck on, that's the thing you don't want to do. Don't be stuck with the original idea. Let it go. Let it die if need be. Move on to something else. Another option you can take, I mentioned earlier that I don't want to spend the time on educating my market, but if it is something that you don't have to spend a lot of time on, let's say you have a great idea and you've had feedback maybe in a smaller scope, focus group or something, and now it's time to sort of market, and in this case through education. So how do you do that? You do it through content. For example, you can do it it doesn't have to be YouTube or a podcast like this. I mean, it could be some sort of maybe a book or an ebook, an actual physical book. It could be some sort of writing that you've created. It could be graphs, or it could be it could be anything, right? Another thing, in order to educate your market, you can find your community. Where is your community, and educate on, as a whole, larger number of groups of people. And you can educate the market through stories. What I mean by that is, sort of explaining your story and how you ended up where you are now, and how you ended up with this idea, and how do you know this solves a problem that's going to solve problems for other people as well. Another option you have, let's say you can't pivot, you realize that all the education in the world isn't going to help, wait. Well, not just wait, but wait and build authority. So build authority, what does that mean? I mean, become an authority in that sector, or in that wherever that product is involved. And I would also add to that, build credibility. So you want to build credibility so people will say, okay, I trust this person. I know this person knows what he or she is talking about. They have experience. I've seen them build different things. Now, I'm not saying people's credentials are the most important thing in the world, but it certainly can be a little bit helpful to decide whether or not you want to believe in them. But building authority is important, and waiting and being patient can sometimes be the solution. And one more solution I can offer, which is one that I like a lot, which is basically finding early adopters. You find the people. I think, James, you called it your 3% at one point or other. You find your early adopters. These are the people that are willing, like they want this thing. They want it, and they're willing to help you get there. Not necessarily like in a direct fashion, but in a sense that they're willing to try it out. They're willing to try something out, maybe even pay for it, so that they can have it. They want to have it right away, so that they then can have the finished product, especially when it's done. These are also called evangelists. And so these are the people you're looking for. You're looking for it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but your early adopters are very important because they give you that feedback that you desperately need. And that's where there's like a sort of, not a collaboration. Well, I guess it's collaboration. They get what they want and you get the information you need. So these are just a few of the options that you have that I find to be probably the best when you're too early and you're not quite sure where to go next. So I've given some options here. Do you think it's possible to compress time through the right, quote unquote, right system or channel?
I absolutely do think you can compress time. And the system that I think about is like a certain personality or personal beliefs that I hold. And one is just be experimental, run a lot of experiments. And two is actually, I would say, like, be a loudmouth. So have people understand and know what you believe. And then, like we talked about 3%. That's how they end up there. They're listening. They're the ones listening.
Well, we know what to do if we find ourselves a little bit too early to market. But the final thing I'd like to say is that vision without timing is like writing a symphony for an empty concert hall. You might be right, but no one can hear it.
I agree with you, and I would say that vision without timing is just not seeing the whole big picture. Vision without timing is a dead idea.
If you're working on something visionary, ask yourself, is this the right time, or am I 5, 10 years, maybe even 3 decades too early?
And honestly, my view is that if you are taking a lot of action and you're out there in the world and experiencing collecting a lot of data, then you won't have to ask that question because you will already know.